bad act.
There are women who are singing in mixed company. They're doing it in clubs. They're using hip-hop. They're using instruments of which you disapprove.
Yes, well then obviously the logical corollary is that, yes, this would not be banned by Islam.
Haras.
I think good on them. I think they're doing something that's really needed. Who needs the messages that they're trying to bring across? People who are sitting at home, already Muslims who are praying 5 times a day, or people who are sort of going down the wrong path, and I say that in inverted commas. But I think also they're actually using a vehicle. My children listen to hip-hop music, and I would much rather they were listening to these girls' music than something by somebody who's going to tell somebody to shoot somebody.
Salman, they're trying to reconcile authentic Islam with Western culture. Do you think that's a good aim to have?
I don't subscribe to this false dichotomy. Western culture, authentic Islam. I live in the United States, and the majority of Muslims here are African American. They have an awesome culture of hip-hop.
Munira and Sakina are Afro-Caribbean, it's got to be said.
Right, so this riddle of culture and religion, where people tend to miss out on the fact that, you can't have religion isolated from culture. And if you're a Muslim growing up in Turkey as opposed to a Muslim growing up in Saudi Arabia or Indonesia or India, your practice is going to be affected by your environment. It says in the Quran, the East and the West belongs to God. So I think both of those young ladies are doing an incredible job, and they're using their minds, their mental faculties to sift through what is right and what is wrong. That's what we're supposed to do.
Saleem, they're very careful to dissociate themselves from crude and violent lyrics. They've said that part of their ambition is to try to combat extremism, and they're trying to dissociate themselves from all the negative influences that surround the hip-hop scene. So the intention seems to be good. Is that enough?
In Islamic law, there are 2 constituent parts for any action to be accepted or to be deemed virtuous. And one is the intention, and secondly is the conformity to Islamic law and Islamic texts. The fact that they're trying to do something good, then that intention, God willing, will be rewarded for that. But as for the actual act itself, then no, that would not be acceptable. But yes, they can be rewarded for the intention.
Haras.
There's a great ayah in the Quran that actually sums it up for me. They ask you, O Muhammad, what is made lawful for them? Say, all good things are made lawful for you. So if it's a good thing, if it's something that's being done for the benefits of the community, for the benefits of Muslims, for the benefits for themselves, then I believe it's a good thing, and I believe that they're doing a very good job.
Well, you see, when I think of Western composers, most of the great classical and romantic composers of the 18th and 19th centuries would have said that they were creating music to glorify God, Saleem.
Yes, and that's an example of intention. I mean, just to go back on the interpretation of the word used in that Quranic ayah that Haras quoted is tayyibat. Tayyibat is something which is good, wholesome and lawful by Islamic law. So it's not something that we can use to define in itself. It's something which is expanded upon in the rest of the Quran and the Sunnah. The whole idea is that God is the one that tests our submission to Him by telling us what is good and what is bad.
Does your attitude change according to whether the people speaking are women or men? Would it be any different if Munira and Sakina had been men?
Of course not. No. Islam does not make any differentiation in that regard. No.
But it does say that women should not sing in mixed company.
There's a specific issue about, for example, the beauty of women's voices compared to men's. But in this case, rap music is not strictly speaking singing. It's more like poetry. I mean, Islamic law is quite precise about these things. It explains what are the various types of speech that human beings have. There can be poetic speech, there can be non-poetic speech, there can be singing, there can be chanting, reciting the Quran, and all these things have their separate laws and rules.
Do you see any virtue in trying to bridge the gulf between youth culture and Islam, which I think is what these 2 young women are trying to do?
There are a number of rap artists and even spoken word poets, as they call them, which don't use music at all. And that's actually reaching out to a lot of non-Muslims and also to Muslims who are very much into the youth culture.
But music does seem to be one particularly effective way of reaching a youth culture.
I've not seen anything to show that it is more effective than what other people are doing without musical instruments.
Well, Salman would tell you he gets 30 million albums worldwide sold.
Yes, okay, now who's going to survey all those people and say, why are you buying the music? Or is anybody surveying them and saying them, are you coming close to Islam?
I think you made a very interesting point there, Ernie. You mentioned bridging the gap. I think it's very important that hip hop, other forms of art, other forms of music are used by British Muslims and Muslims who live in the States or anywhere else to actually define their own personal culture and how they live within the country where they're living. If we don't do that, if the youngsters don't do that, then there will always be a dichotomy between Eastern and Western, Muslim and non-Muslim. And I firmly believe, like Salman, that there is no dichotomy. There are literalist extremist interpretations that can cause that dichotomy, and by bridging this gap we can transcend the differences that we have.
I mentioned earlier that there was a few weeks ago a bit of a controversy about some Muslim parents removing their children from London schools because they didn't want them to have music classes that involved instruments. Do you think they were right to do that, Saleem?
Yes, without a doubt. I mean, in the same way, many parents, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim, choose to withdraw their children from sex education classes.
Music lessons
parents
are part of the national curriculum. That's the
Yes,
difference.
and actually my children go to a Muslim school where they're actually, their curriculum on music is completely Sharia compliant and at the same time fulfills the national curriculum requirements. There's no national curriculum requirement that says any particular type of musical instrument has to be used. They talk about teaching rhythm, they talk about teaching rhyme, they talk about teaching a number of very general concepts, which I think is very commendable, and I think that really does tie in with the Islamic ethos.
Salman, I just wonder, does it create another degree of separation? And can any education be complete that doesn't include a fair degree of musical education?
Muslims are exhorted to learn about all knowledge for the love of knowledge. And why should we be afraid of putting our kids in schools in which there is education aside from Muslim education? I think this fear of the 21st century among some Muslims of being corrupted by other culture, it goes against everything the Prophet taught.
Saleem?
I hate to sound like a broken record, if you pardon the pun, but the fact is that it just goes back to the same thing that we're saying all along, which is that whatever are the paradigms that Islam dictates, we should abide by. We should not deliberately go against what are the common customs. But if there is something that we have been told from revelation that it is ultimately harmful to us spiritually or whatever, then we have to keep away from it. And especially if the national curriculum allows it. I mean, I don't see there's any problem in the national curriculum allowing this form of understanding of rhyme and rhythm.
I think it's one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. The actual pulling out the youngsters from the school. This is a new form of Islam. This is a new phenomenon that we're seeing in the UK. I'd never heard of this before. If they want to practice that particular viewpoint, then they have a right to. We live in a free society. However, these are youngsters, these are children. Are they learning good things? Are they learning bad things? They're not learning something that's going to make them a bad person. And I think that's a very important part of the child's development. It's ridiculous that these parents pulled them out.
I want to ask each of you a final question. If your daughter announced she wanted to join a band, what would you say to her, Salman?
I would say start with an acoustic guitar, then go on to an electric.
Saleem?
What I would like to do, my wife and I, we have this culture that we would discuss things with our children, make them understand and show them that, look, this is something which is ultimately not going to be beneficial for you in the hereafter or in this life. You're better off choosing something which would be more wholesome and according with the noble teachings of God.
Haras?
I'd want to know what kind of music it is, what the lifestyle associated with that music is, what the objectives are, not just as a Muslim but as a father, as a parent who wants to try and do the best for their children. And if she was any good, I would actually help her. If she wasn't, I'd try and talk her out of it.
Well, there we must leave it. My thanks to Saleem Chagtai, Salman Ahmad and Haras Rafiq. I'll be back at the same time next week when I hope you'll join me.